Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait just one more minute and give people a chance to get logged in before we get started. Well, welcome to our first session of the Friends of the Owens Thomas House's lecture series, Dinner with the Experts. I'm Shannon Brown-Mullis, Telfair Museum's Curator of History and Decorative Arts. We know we can't socialize together right now, but we're really delighted to have you joining us this evening to share our love of history, decorative arts, and our very special historic site. The mission of the Friends of the Owens Thomas House is to broaden the influence of the site and of Telfair museums generally within our community. So we really think of this organization as one that seeks to cultivate the community's commitment to the preservation of this site, as well as encouraging an interest in history and decorative arts among our current and hopefully our future members. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's lecture, and I want to remind you that after the lecture, we will be having questions and answers. So please type those into the Q&A or to the chat, and we will get to as many as we can. So we are lucky to be joined this evening by Historic Charleston Foundation's Director of Museums, Grahame Long. We're delighted to have you, Grahame.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic and very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But let me tell them a little bit about you first. Grahame is the author of 3 books, numerous articles, and he has lectured extensively throughout the Southeast on various topics concerning material culture, decorative arts, and social histories of the Carolina Lowcountry. Tonight, he's going to share some of the newest discoveries from the Nathaniel Russell House. So thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Shannon. I appreciate it. Big fan of the Telfair, big fan of the Owens Thomas House, and even bigger fan of the Friends of the Owens Thomas House. I know things like this do not stay afloat, or even especially now, we know who our friends are. And so thank you for supporting them and for having me here this evening. And I think this is something that started for us in about 2017 in earnest, and then about 2019 we really started to put our money where our mouth was as far as what this particular outbuilding had in store for us, which we really didn't know at the time. This was something that kind of started by accident, a happy accident for us. But I will say this before we really get into the nuts and bolts of things. I am but an interloper in this project, or at least I feel like one. If you ask me how long I've been with Historic Charleston Foundation, I'm going to look at my watch, because it hasn't been that long. It's been I started about a little over a month ago. Now, 20 years prior to that, I worked a mile down the street. I was the curator for the Charleston Museum, but I had been very close with Historic Charleston Foundation for a very long time. I sat on the Nathaniel Russell House committee for 8 years. And then my predecessor, Lauren Northup, who was the director of museums, went on to become director of engagement for Classic American Homes Preservation Trust. And she called me and said, you know, this is a project that we just don't want to kind of let fly to the wind. Would you be interested in taking it over? And so, yeah, I said, why not? It's what could possibly go wrong? And so I after a 20-year career at the Charleston Museum, I found myself packing up and becoming the director of museums for Historic Charleston Foundation. I walked down the street to my new office, not with all the boxes, but and so this slave house, or the kitchen house project, which I've now inherited, was a reason for me changing jobs after so many years. This was an important project that I did not want to see come to a screeching halt, and at a time with COVID and everything else going around, it very easily could have. So it's important to us, to me personally, to my predecessor certainly, and to the entire foundation, that we continue on with this work as best we can. I am new to this type of technology, and that is to say I'm very bad at it. So if, is that popping up now? Can everyone see that?
Yes, it looks great.
If you're, we were founded, for those of you who may not be aware of Historic Charleston Foundation, we are a preservation and advocacy organization. We were founded in 1947 and have been responsible for the entire preservation movement of the historic district of Charleston, and protecting that and making sure it survives really on a daily basis. My job, well, actually, in addition to that, we also own two house museums. The Aiken-Rhett House, which was constructed circa 1820, and the Nathaniel Russell House, constructed circa 1808. My job is to oversee the preservation, administration, and interpretation of these crucial historic properties. Now, for those of you unacquainted with the Nathaniel Russell House, it is widely considered one of America's most important neoclassical townhouses. We are now open. We're open 4 days a week. And so if you're in the neighborhood, please stop by and visit. It was built in 1808 by the man you see in the center, Nathaniel Russell, who was a Charleston merchant. He moved to Charleston from Rhode Island as a fairly young man in the 1750s and 1760s, excuse me, built his masterpiece in 1808, and one we are protecting and certainly using as one of our house museums now. This we opened this house to the public in 1955, and it's been through several generations of study and restoration, multiple projects focused on documentary research and forensic analysis, all of which today really form the bedrock of our understanding of this success, excuse me, of this exceptional house. Now, our discussion today is not going to focus on the main house. We're going to go out in the backyard. The main house, obviously, as you can imagine, has been the center of attention for most of its tourable museum life. But what was originally the kitchen, laundry, and the kitchen quarters, the laundry, or the wash house, as has been suggested, it might have been called, and 3 upstairs quarters for the enslaved, was not what you would say was at the forefront of our mid 20th century thinking as far as restoration goes. In effect, as the main house was further prepared for its transition into a museum property, these secondary spaces were renovated, worked over. On your screen, that's again the kitchen house, and there was a hyphen built shortly after the main house. The lower section anyway, the top section was added. Later 19th century, the kitchen house mainly on the kitchen and laundry mainly on the left side of that image. But this was not part of the entire study or restoration process that was going on when the house was opened as a tourable home. These secondary spaces, the kitchen and laundry specifically, were converted into offices by what my predecessor so delicately described as a savage 20th century gut job that robbed it of any architectural merit. And that was sort of the collective thinking of that time. And it was continued as office space for most of its life up until about a year and a half ago. But that in lies the genesis for what is now our kitchen house project. It begins, as many projects, as I'm sure Shannon can say, in the museum business, how these projects begin often the way they often do, with a little more than just kind of a passing skeptical thought. Sitting at her desk one day within those same offices was Lauren Northup, again, at the time Director of Museums for Historic Charleston Foundation, my predecessor and best friend in the business still. And she tells this story, and no matter how many times she says it, I never get tired of hearing it. But she said she just looked up one day from her desk and happened to notice the unremarkable, quite vernacular door that you see here on the slide now, that she, me, her assistant, pretty much all of us walked through for decades, and still mindlessly believing in the collective wisdom that whatever original fabric from this office space, which once was completely gone over or lost to history, as things so often are. So we decided, well, let's take a closer look. And when the first person we always seem to call in a situation like this is the woman you see there in the middle. That is Susan Buck. She is the high priestess of scientific and forensic paint analysis on most historic properties. Because as we were sitting there looking at that door, like, yeah, that looks like a really old door. Maybe we should take a look at it. Are those hand planed planks? And so Susan, who fortunately happened to be in town for something completely different, agreed to come over. And now she was part of the original understanding, part of the original research and that kind of thing going on at the same time from the earlier parts of the workhouse back in the 1990s. But we also asked her if she'd ever scratched the surface of the back office quarters, and she said she hadn't. And it took her about 5 minutes when she started on the door, realizing that, yeah, this door is definitely original. And as she carried on around the room and quickly established that the door casing, as well as the window casing, sills, and sashes were first period as well, the evidence quickly proved that we were dealing with much more original fabric than any of us ever thought possible. Just fortunate enough, Susan Buck is married to one of the premier architectural historians in the business. And so we obviously called him, which again, just kind of good luck. Ed Chappell is the retired director of the Department of Architectural and Archaeological Research at Colonial Williamsburg. And Ed, along with Susan, a few weeks later, joined up, came back to the kitchen house and started removing some exploratory sections of the 20th century plasterboard in each room, peering through the openings with flashlights. And all of us sort of quickly surmised that original plaster walls survived in every single room of the kitchen house, perfectly encapsulated by plasterboard that was installed in the 20th century. So as you can imagine, this was all evidence, really all the evidence that we needed. Once we started peeling away these little sections and realizing that this 20th century renovation, I don't know if you want to call it good luck, dumb luck, lazy renovations or what, but this, instead of ripping out all the original fabric, what the workers had done was just gone right smack over the tops of everything and just created almost a preservation type capsule for what was behind all these things, or for everything that had been there before and was, fortunately for us, still there. This was all the evidence we needed before we all sort of looked at each other and said, yeah, we're going to have to rip all of this out. And that is, fortunately, exactly what we did. The wall boards came down, the room, as this happened, the room really just transformed before us. And within hours, we were treated to an expanse of original wall with lime washes, miraculously intact. The only thing missing was the original chair rail, the scar of which you can see in your middle image there. We removed here we are. We removed a patch of what turned out to be a modern raised wooden floor, and underneath, perfectly preserved again, was the wide plank first period floorboards with their last coat of 19th century whitewash still intact. And with so much of this original fabric uncovered, we were able to get our first sense of the space as it was during the period of occupation by those enslaved working in the kitchen and laundry and elsewhere, for sure, in the Nathaniel Russell House. If that wasn't good enough, like I said, from that point on, these rooms took on an entirely different feel. They were no longer offices. Well, for one reason, we ripped everything out. But for the second reason, now it was probably, we were looking at so much more than just what was before kitchen and laundry. Now we were looking at specific living and working spaces. Probably the only place in the house where the enslaved may have had a moment of peace, if any. It was also about this time, the removal, as we continued again removing a lot of these modern materials, that a whole new chapter of this undertaking began for us, and something we were not expecting, and something we're still actually working through in different ways, shapes, and form. But working along the west wall, we started stirring up lots of debris packed between the studs and the baseboards, most of which were undisturbed 19th century rat's nests. Now, if you don't know anything about rat's nests, then I'm proud to be the first to enlighten you. And in case you don't remember me for anything else, rats can live their whole lives in about in about a 50-foot radius from their nest. And in this area, they tend to gather items, and what they don't eat, they pack tightly into a single spot and urinate all over them. It turns out, that's actually a good thing. It turns out that rat urine acts as a preservative. It crystallizes and forms a very hard concretion that just kind of just holds everything tight and keeps oxidation at bay. So that is kind of how we really got into the thick of things as far as getting context into what was going on in the kitchen and laundry through the examination of these rats' nests. You see there in the middle image there, you'll see our intern, Katie Martin, who was a really good sport when we told her how she'd be spending her summer, carefully removing dozens of rat nests from the walls. She actually called me the other day. She wants to come back. And we said, no problem, come on whenever you want. Of course, finding all of this stuff is one thing. Sorting and categorizing it is another. We spent several days really painstakingly, microscopically in some instances, combing through the debris and removing artifacts. We found buttons, stockings, marbles, straight pins, crab shells, scraps of newspaper, textile remnants, all manner of fruit and plant material, and hundreds of bones from butchered animals pinched from the cookroom below that these rats had sort of carried off into their nests and left there as part of their domicile. I guess the most immediately exciting finds were two small fragments of paper. And these came out fairly early in the, I guess we'll call it an excavation. One was a minuscule bit of newspaper with the name Crookshank on it, which fortunately that's an unusual name in Charleston, and we were able to quickly match that to the digitized original and found that that was a fragment of a newspaper dated from November of 1838. The newspaper, again, helps us determine the nest was from an 1830s context, which was actually crucial and became a key ingredient in our next find, which was this tiny fragment of paper with letters printed in neat rows, which upon further examination, we came to realize was a small scrap from a 19th century reading primer. These two fragments were found very close together from two, actually, I believe from the same rat's nest, which means they were collected in a fairly short period of time, separate from one another. So what's so important about a reading primer in relation to 1838? That's of immediate interest because under the 1830s South Carolina Slave Code, it was illegal for enslaved people to read and write. And this small fragment, combined with the huge amount of other reading materials we found in the walls, clearly show that someone who lived in the kitchen house was literate. And what's more, they were possibly teaching others. Whether or not the Russell family condoned this illegal practice we may never know that. But knowing it took place certainly demonstrates, I think, that even though the Russell family could as my predecessor really puts it poignantly, even though the Russell family could undeniably enslave bodies, they could not enslave minds. Along with the papers, this short length of cloth with 5 intact brass buttons. Another one of the first artifacts we pulled from the walls. I am pleased to say we have since determined this piece to be a fragment of a waistcoat from the 1830s, made of black worsted wool with a black silk lining and brass buttons. This waistcoat was likely the uniform of an enslaved butler, body servant, possibly a footman. Records of such livery like this can be found in assorted estate inventories from time to time. Again, just to give you some context, Charleston, there's a Charlestonian named Mary Pringle, recorded in her biannual clothing allotment for male house servants that included, quote, a livery coat and vest, 4 cravats, and 2 pocket handkerchiefs, in addition to 4 shirts, 2 or 3 pairs of pants, 3 vests, and 2 coats. We have, unfortunately, no surviving records of clothing allotments at the Russell House, but the practice was common, so it's likely this surviving fragment, because of where it was found in context with some other things in the upstairs quarter section, was worn by a Russell enslaved servant, certainly while on duty. Not everything we found was as obvious as that, and certainly not as big. Um, this tiny coral, and I can tell you just how much work you have to put into finding little bits and pieces like that if you really want to know. It's not something that's done quickly, or you kind of fan these rat's nests out on a table, and you comb through them and you comb through them and you comb through them. And just when you think you found everything, you comb through them about 6 more times. And fortunately we did, because that's where this little tiny coral bead showed up. So far, the smallest and arguably most poignant piece we've uncovered. Probably part of a piece of jewelry, very expensive one at that. Coral was an exotic material imported to Charleston, and in jewelry form is most often associated with children's necklaces and teething rattles in the 18th and 19th century, as it was coral was thought to have these protective and medicinal properties. This stray bead, it's perhaps it's being that because of its size and in comparison to other pieces like this that are in one, or bracelets and necklaces of the like that are in one piece, we're thinking perhaps this stray bead could have slipped from the pocket of Lydia Middleton, who's pictured here. Lydia is the enslaved nurse who cared for Nathaniel Russell's grandchildren from 1857 to somewhere around 1865. I think it's okay to let your mind wander in situations like this, especially while you're looking at stuff like this, because that's how really ideas get formed. Lydia is the only enslaved person of whom we have a photograph from the Russell House. She's pictured here in 1857 holding Charlotte in her lap, despite being described as a beloved and devoted nurse. By the white family who owned her. Lydia left the house immediately after emancipation and never returned. As our work continued and more bits and pieces revealed themselves to us, it became very clear very quickly that we were going to have to remove, like I said, pretty much all the remaining 20th century materials in order to assess what had survived from this first period structure. So that we could begin to plan for things like material analysis, context analysis, and ultimately reinterpretation and restoration of the entire building. That is to say, it was time to fess up. It was time to cry uncle. We needed help. We needed a lot of it. So what do? Well, in situations like this, we remember who our friends are. And fortunately for some of us, our closest in the business are all curators and conservators at Colonial Williamsburg, who offered up their labs and their expertise and their machinery and their technology to help us assess our finds. And it's a good thing they were on board, or offered to be on board very early, especially for our next big discovery. With this, which this time was directly under our feet, kind of like that really old door that we'd walked past for years on end. Something we had been walking over the entire time, not knowing it was there until some of these floorboards started to be peeled away. Under our feet, so caked with crud, and it blended in perfectly with the rest of the place. We all walked past it again, and then finally, it's like my dad used to say, if it'd been a snake, it'd bit you. And this was sandwiched between the first period floor and the modern floor. But this chunk was in fact a 2-foot by 3-foot fragment of the only 19th century floor cloth ever discovered in Charleston. Its survival, well, like everything else in this project, is remarkable. The location where this was found is noteworthy. That is atop the original floorboards, right in front of the downstairs laundry hearth. This area was so worn from at least 100 years of laundry fires that evidently repairs were in order. The worn spot was first covered with a patch of what appears to be a recycled remnant of embossed tin, which was then covered over with this fragment of floor cloth. And clearly this fragment was once part of a larger, grand, high-style piece that had likely began its life in the main house, and as it became increasingly worn, was cut down and recycled and placed here in the dependency. When the modern raised floor of the laundry was installed sometime around 1908, The carpenters, to their credit, just nailed, or to our benefit, nailed the new floor down directly on top of the floor cloth fragment, unwittingly preserving what we're now coming to realize was a crucial piece of Charleston's material culture. With an initial cleaning, the pattern emerged in better than expected detail. Even better with further examination. Here is Colonial Williamsburg materials conservator Kirsten Moffett. She revealed, and fortunately, this is the kind of thing that just sort of keeps on giving, as she started to take a closer look at it. She revealed that what we had found wasn't just one floor cloth, but it was actually two pressed together. The bottom fragment, plus probably the older of the two, is visible. It's hard to see in these images, but is visible through large holes in the losses at the top. Kirsten's microanalysis suggested the earlier cloth is painted with a deeply colored orange-red ground pigment with a design outlined in carbon-based black paint. The top floor cloth consists of a coarse hemp or jute backing, followed by a deep brick or brick red colored base coat, followed by 2 layers of yellow paint, and a design layer that includes a zinc-based white pigment. That's actually important, that last one. Zinc dates the top floor cloth to circa 1845 or later, which hopefully we're thinking the bottom one, the one that this was sandwiched up against and stuck to, will be certainly earlier than that. The 2 floor cloths are currently undergoing conservation at Colonial Williamsburg. Here's the studio of Amelia Jensen, where she's carefully cleaning and consolidating both of these pieces, and hopes that we can learn more about each layer once they are decipherable. As you've seen, we've been fortunate to find objects that offer clues to the hearts, minds, and desires of the people living here before 1865, which has become to us, both an honor and a responsibility. When we found the object pictured here, which if this looks like a chandelier prism, that's exactly what it is. But we were all a bit perplexed. It's not, we're kind of like, well, they may have had a floor cloth, but we're pretty sure they didn't have a chandelier hanging in the kitchen or the laundry house, unless this was some kind of just anomaly that had just never been recorded. But we came to really look at this a little bit harder. This is by far, so far, the most enigmatic object we have discovered yet, because of where and how we found it. That is purposely wedged tightly between the end of an original floorboard and the first period masonry wall. It's possible this may have something to do with West African spirituality. Now, one end of the crystal, as you can see, identifies it as a Western object, professionally cut for use on a chandelier. It's the other end, however, that shows evidence of a percussive strike, which means it was intentionally struck one or more times to shape it into a crude point. Naturally occurring quartz crystals are frequently uncovered at sites of rural enslavement and are typically associated with West African spiritual practice. Like this one, they are often found near windows and doors. But again, that's in rural enslavement atmospheres. Knowing this, though, we are thinking, since this is an urban setting, that a person living in the Russell House quarters, familiar with this practice, but again, enslaved in an urban environment, may have adapted this Western object for spiritual use. And assuming that to be the case, we carefully documented the location of the crystal before removing it for study and for testing. Our ultimate aim, however, is really to put it right back where we found it. So where are we now in the process? We've stripped out our original material. We've excavated a lot of bits and pieces, and plenty of rat's nests. In fact, if anybody wants to volunteer to go through some more rat's nests, all you got to do is call. We got plenty of work, no problem. But as I'm sure as you've guessed already, COVID-19 has really put the brakes on a lot of our activity, but it's not all bad. The project has not come to a screeching halt, which was our fear. Things are starting to sort of crank back up a little bit. Despite shutdowns, there are a few components of this whole thing that are continuing. The upstairs hearth cavities contained, as you see here, an inordinate amount of seeds. And this is a kitchen house, so this might be kind of expected. But lots of seeds, plant matter, butchered animal bones. And with advanced scientific analysis, these leftovers snatched by rats from the cookroom tell a mostly complete story of the food history of the kitchen house. It's important to remember that the sort of currently in vogue dishes that Charleston is known for, shrimp and grits, biscuits, fried okra, rice in its many forms, have their origins in cookrooms and kitchen houses, just like the one at the Nathaniel Russell House. So to help decipher all this food-based debris, we have partnered with the archaeobotany department at the University of Pennsylvania, whose students are back in class, fortunately, and we'll spend the next few years combing back through the bags of material from the kitchen house in order to scientifically reconstruct what was grown, prepared, and eaten at the Nathaniel Russell House over time. I was on the phone with the chair of that department, and she said that this collection is unprecedented for anything coming out of the American South, so much so that the University of Pennsylvania's geneticists now want to get involved, especially with the rice husks. And if they can do a DNA build, DNA mapping of these rice husks, they can perhaps, at least they seem to think that they can scientifically trace this DNA pattern back to what precise section of Africa this particular rice came from, which will be very exciting if that proves to be the case. So we will certainly keep you posted on that. But for the eventual interpretive phase of those findings, we're pleased to announce Charleston-based chef and food waste scholar Kevin Mitchell has now joined with our committee and our team. Kevin's master's thesis was entitled "From Black Hands to White Mouths: Charleston's Freed and Enslaved Cooks and Their Influence on Food of the South." And this is our guiding text for these next foodways interpretations and discoveries. We're also continuing our field work with many extant dependency structures as we can, and this is also where the Owens Thomas House comes in. We are trying to find as many of these that are somewhat intact. A lot of these, as you can imagine, have been reworked into apartments or separate homes in some cases, or even garages, and they kind of like what we thought before with our office space in the kitchen house, that the original fabric was long gone. But we are having a little bit of luck. A lot of these, again, have been demolished, got us repurposed, but there are still a few out there. And careful study of just one of these structures certainly reveals an immense amount of information. There is still, however, of course, so much to do and learn. And quite frankly, we don't completely know yet where or how this project will end. If nothing else, though, perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Kitchen House project are the stories of the enslaved people that we quite literally are uncovering. Are they stories of resistance? Probably. Of resilience? Certainly. But undeniably, we are developing a story that at long last bestows humanity on the men, women, and children who lived in these rooms. We no longer have a lack of documentary evidence. We are now flushed with it, and we continue gathering and preserving this tangible data to better understand this unrepresented part of this house history in particular. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. If I can figure out, oh, there it is. If I can figure out how to close the screen. But thank you for that. And this is the first time I've been able to really present on the Kitchen House by myself without Lauren sitting here beside me, nudging me to make sure I don't get anything wrong. So thank you for that opportunity in particular. But as I said, it is continuing. We're doing what we can, how we can. Our next big step is probably beside our next big step, at least on site, I should say, is we're going to try to I'm exploring the concept of, not the concept, I'm exploring the possibility of doing a more comprehensive archaeological survey and excavation of the ground underneath the kitchen and laundry. So there's the floorboard, then under there is actually a sublevel. The walls on that sublevel actually, we discovered, have whitewash on them, and whitewash is not something you typically find in a basement that's not being used. So archaeology will help us uncover a little bit more clues as to what was going on down there. Okay.
Thank you, Graham. That was fascinating. I will ask that everyone take a minute to type in your questions. And while you do, I would love to ask you to give us a little bit more context in two areas. One, was this the only outbuilding on this site, or are there other supporting structures? And two, what do we know about the people who were enslaved there? Do we know a number of people, their ages or genders, or any kind of information?
The first part of your question, that's the only outbuild. There's two outbuildings. The one, the kitchen house, the kitchen which is joined with the laundry and the three quarters upstairs. That's the one we're currently working on. There is another outbuilding joined to that one behind that one, uh, which was the stable and carriage house. That has been renovated two and three times over since the foundation took it over and opened it in the 1950s. Um, we we're not quite not we're not there yet. We want to see kind of where we want to really tackle and finish up, and however long this takes before we have reason to believe. But here again, as I said, we've been wrong, wrong in great ways. That we have reason to believe that this time, as far as the stable goes, that really was a complete do-over, and most of the construction records or renovation records, the last time that thing was renovated, we put in, there was a modern kitchen put in, restroom facilities put in, um, and a few, really that's about it for that section. And a staff break room. Now that was done in the 1990s, I believe. And that did involve a lot of tearing out of prior renovated fabric from the 1980s and again the 1960s. So fortunately, one of the people, the contractor who worked on that segment was conscious of, because it was a more modern renovation and done more recently in time. His name's David Hoffman. He is a historically minded contractor. You can, if you see his name, he's very conscious of these kinds of things before he does. He doesn't necessarily go in and do the gut job thing that I mentioned before. So with David there, he was actually part of those renovations, and his notes did not record, and he is still very much alive and around. In fact, he's on our board of trustees now. But he does not recall anything because it was a stable and not necessarily a permanent living quarters, that there was a lot of interior fabric to be found. Not to say that archaeology someday probably will, if I have anything to do with it, wander over there, at least around the perimeter, to see what can be uncovered over there. So that is certainly on the list of things to do. I regret to say it's not too close to the top of the list, but that is something we'll be taking part in. The second part of your question, Lydia is the only person that we have a photograph of. We know there were 18 slaves in the house at any one time. Now, Lydia we know very well. We know one other one very well. He was a male whose name is escaping me right now. You have to excuse me for that. But he is there both before and after emancipation. But the rest we don't know. And part of this, we do have the numbers because of state records, but what we don't know are names. So we have launched a a sort of tandem research project along with this that graduate students at the Clemson Center for Historic Preservation, which their campus is actually in Charleston. We have a couple of students working over the course of the next 2 years to try to come up with names for these folks and whatever ties to the Nathaniel Russell House they have, the Russell family, or the or excuse me, the Alstons that buy the house after the Russell family. So hopefully we'll have some luck there.
18 is really quite a lot for an urban property.
It is. It is. They're between the stable, the kitchen house. There's 3/4, and there's only 3/4 above the kitchen and laundry. Obviously, there would have been some above the stable as well. Probably 3, based on the size of the, as best we can tell, anyway. The rest may have been in the house on the 3rd floor, tending to children. It's gardens as well. There's an extensive pleasure garden and a work yard attached to the property. So, but where exactly they're living would have been on the house at some point, and that's hopefully again something that we hope these students will be able to uncover, or maybe, possibly, hopefully, as we get into archaeology, that may be something that could be unearthed as well.
Mhm. So we have a number of good questions, so I hope we get to them all. We have someone who would like to know if the office door you've been talking to us about is the only original door left, and is original hardware within the.
Yes, the door is the only door that forged again by sheer luck survived. It does have the original iron HL hinges. It is hand planked cypress. It has about 6 coats of paint on it, which was done over the course of many years, probably even more coats than that. But that is the, as far as hardware goes, the other hardware we found has been coming out of the rat's nest. We haven't found any in situ other than on that door.
And I'm going to answer, so somebody said, have we found, because you're talking about the rat's nest, have we found any rat's nest at the Owens Thomas house? And we have not, that I am aware of.
They're there. I promise you they're there.
I'm sure they're here.
nothing against the Owens Thomas house, but they're in there somewhere.
Yeah, and it may be tomorrow I pull out the report from the 1990s when they tore out everything modern and see if there are rat's nests that I don't know about. You certainly have me curious about. So we are wondering if you have any intention of recreating the floor cloths that were found, and if so, which would you choose to recreate?
Probably, I think the one we're going to get the most data on is for some reason the top one. The paint on the bottom one, it was so stuck to the one that was placed over the top of it that I don't think we're going to be able to really uncover much of a pattern. We can tell you what kind of paint was on it. We can tell you the chemical makeup of it, but as far as the actual pattern of what it actually did, where the repeats are, and it just doesn't look the same as the top piece does. The top piece has a very distinct pattern to it. We found the repeat, so it's probably that one that we will definitely end up reproducing. Without a doubt, we will preserve the top one and make a reproduction of the bottom one. And when the reinterpretation phase of the kitchen house, when we start to renovate, well, renovate may be a bad word here, but when we start to sort of rebuild, recreate this kitchen and laundry based on what we found, certainly that fragment or a reproduced version of it will be back in the same spot where we found it.
Great, and that kind of brings us into the next question. I'm going to ask a really large question, I think, because it is 3 questions that have been asked, put together, but they are all part of the same topic, and I think we'll wrap this up really nicely. So we have people who are wondering what the interpretation and visitor experience might be like, what the timeline for that is, and if a book about the whole process will be published.
Yes, and yes. Well, timeline, a lot of variables in that right now. When we can really get started again. We have been incredibly fortunate on a number of situations as far as funding goes. We actually, when we launched our first fundraising campaign for this project to begin, which was simply for demolition, demolition being pulling away all that 20th century stuff. And once we got a sense of what we were up against, we started not advertising, but we started really promoting a lot of these things and how that material was going to be important later on. So the funding has really come through to the point where people were throwing, it's a great problem to have in the nonprofit world. We actually had too much money. And so, so we do have funding in place to launch archaeology and that sort of thing, which will be coming down the pipe. As far as a timeline, like I said, a lot of variables in place. I think as soon as all of us can really get together in a room and go over this in person and actually handling these pieces when these things start to come out of conservation, it'd be kind of reckless for me to guess at that right now because as you know, we all know, with COVID still lurking, that's been fairly difficult, and everything has sort of being carried on through Zoom like we are now. So that's really difficult to put a pin in where the timeline is going. If archaeology gets involved, that will be at least a year. I can promise you that based on my experience with archaeology. But also then we'll get into a phase 2 of a reinterpretation and a renovation. Visitors can visit the kitchen and laundry as it looks now. Some of those photos that I showed you of where everything's just been removed and it's just standing there in its skeletal form. We did build a floating bridge across the floor of the kitchen and laundry. So you can, if you come to the Nathaniel Russell House, you can go into this area. And we have interpreted the area into our audio guide. We are an app-based tour with both the Aiken-Rhett and the Nathaniel Russell. So if you have a smartphone or you can get one from our front desk, they'll let you, you can pull up our app and that will guide you through that small area as it exists right now. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the third part of that was, the part I'm missing on that is how is it going to be reinterpreted? Did I remember right?
How it's going to be reinterpreted and whether a book is going to be published about the
A
project.
book, definitely. We've already talked. In fact, that was there was one of those things that was like, well, we're glad. One of the first things that my employer told me was that we're glad you have book writing experience, because there's definitely going to need to be a book on this type of thing. So I can assure you that's coming. That will probably be the last final stamp on the Kitchen House project. So that will definitely be in the works. Again, once we kind of have a handle on everything that's going on out there with the seeds and the botanical material up at Pennsylvania, the material coming out of Williamsburg that's being cleaned, and the ongoing research about the actual slaves who we're hoping to find would be in this house. Reinterpretation is going to be, that's a tough one. I don't completely know. I know that there is one section of the upstairs quarter where we did not find any old material, and that amazingly comes in handy, because that makes for a perfect spot to put in interpretive panels, casework to exhibit some of these materials where we know we won't be destroying anything. So we've studied that modern area, we've cleaned it up, we know what so to put anything over that particular spot, we know we're not damaging any of the original fabric because it wasn't there to begin with. So that actually, like I said, is going to come in handy for the interpretive side of this. The downstairs kitchen and laundry, that's probably, again, the jury's still out. We have some significant work to do on how much we want to put back. I have some ideas. I mean, one of the things I'd almost like to do a half and half, like half completely exposed and the other half sort of rebuilt to where it was. So you see half of the room what kind of a rebuilt original form, and then the other half in the excavated form. That's something we're contemplating right now. But unfortunately, like I said, putting a pin in when as time goes on, something I've learned through years of museum work is in archaeology associations is that it does not happen fast, and it has to be thorough. But there we do obviously foresee an end, and we want that end to come soon. And so we're still working towards that as best we can. But keep us in your thoughts and prayers. But check us out. We do have an Instagram, Facebook. As things are starting, as the gears are slowly starting to crank back up, and we'll be making posts on that. Check our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and as updates come along, we'll certainly make those known.
Thank you so much, Graham. We are so impressed with the team that you all have pulled together from a variety of places and institutions to really get at the heart of every bit of information that can be found in this building. It's just amazing.
Well, thank you for your support, and we appreciate that very much. And we'll keep you posted, and I'm happy to come back and as things move along and bring y'all up to speed. Just let me know.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everybody who joined us tonight. It was a great presentation, and your questions were really wonderful. So I want to remind you that this is the first of a 3-part series in September, and there will be 4 of these series throughout the next year. As we're not sure we can gather together, we will at least meet here to explore some really exciting ideas. So we will be reconvening next week, next Sunday, to learn a little bit more about urban slave quarters in New Orleans, which is really exciting. So don't forget to order your dinner from Joe's at the Jepson. If you'd like to have it delivered for next Sunday, you need to order by Thursday. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.